Okay, let's get started. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the May 18th, 2022 meeting of the City of Oneonta Planning Commission. Clerk, could you please call roll call members?
Chair Levin.
Present. Or
Vice
here.
Chair Marino. Here. Commissioner Maskin.
Here.
Commissioner Stanton.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Commissioner Digan.
Here.
Commissioner Sanders. Here. Councilmember Risberger.
Thank you. So, next on the agenda, is there any correspondence?
No.
Thank you. Are there any petitioners here aside wishing to address the commission on any issue? Okay. Next is minutes. So has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the April 20th meeting? Are there any questions or concerns about the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So much. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Marino, seconded by Commissioner Thomas. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I guess we could do like a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Minutes are approved.
I want to abstain. I wasn't here.
Oh, okay, we have one abstention
Yeah.
from Commissioner Maskin. Old business. I guess I was informed by the clerk that the fraternities in question did not obtain a CFC. So
Yeah, so the fraternities are still not ready. And we didn't see a point in noticing their applications again and spending the money to do a public notice if their applications aren't complete.
So I guess they're gonna have to come back from summer vacation when they're ready.
Didn't they say they were gonna come at this meeting?
Yeah, they had indicated that they would be present today.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like, they could come back, but none of their, they're not done.
Yeah, they didn't meet the eligible criteria, or the criteria to obtain a special use permit, so there's no point. So it's one of, I think, like, again, I mean, if we were to make recommendations to the council, it would be that the renewal of the SCP should fall under administrative review for the fraternities especially, since it's more of like a ministerial action at this point. There's really no year-over-year change, and that city staff often handle compliance issues, with the fraternity in question or sorority in question. It'd be the most efficient and would still afford the same level of review without requiring them to come to the meeting. The meeting is largely performative anyway, since the majority of the compliance is done outside of very city staff or city staff hours or business hours. I don't know.
It's nice to see them.
Yeah, it is nice to see them. They're always dressed up really nicely. But like I said, I just feel like, it'd be eliminating some unnecessary red tape and anxiety on their part and just get things across. And, I think that the public would still have the recourse of attending meetings of the Common Council or us to, if there were concerns, and they can voice them accordingly. So the appropriate response would be, so there's still that. Okay, so under new business, the first applicant on the agenda is Thomas and Patricia Mann. Sorry,
That's correct.
No, it's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. And they are seeking to demolish an existing garage and replace it with a new one. So if you want to just tell us, if there's anything else that you want to add to the act.
What more information can I provide? I don't know.
That's really
I think I've already provided what was needed. Am I correct on that, Steve? Or?
Yeah, so this garage that they're looking to demolish would have just gone to Board of Public Service for a unsafe demolition. In this case, because the new structure is larger than 200 square feet, you have to do site plan review. It's essentially a similarly sized garage in a similar location, similar
same, like similar footprint.
Yeah.
No real.
Can I just add to that? It's exactly what the old garage was.
Sure, so there's really no noticeable change in impervious coverage from what was originally there. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay. So, before we can take any action, we have to comply with the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. So, this action appears to be a type 2 action under seeker, meaning that the action is not likely to have a significant adverse impact on the environment. And so the specific section we'd be citing would be, I think, about 617.5.
Yeah, there's usually stick on there.
You have the subsection on it.
You think I'd have this one memorized because I typed it almost every one.
617.5, part 12, which refers
yeah.
to the construction, expansion, or placement of minor accessory pertinent residential structures, including garages, carports, patios, decks, swimming pools, tennis courts, satellite dishes, fences, barns, storage sheds, or other buildings, not changing land use or density. So, does anybody have any questions about that, or do they want to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion to classify this action as a type 2 action under seeker, made by Commissioner Maskin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Stanton.
Yeah.
Or do we have to get anything else or whatever?
He got it.
Well, all right, so, the tie. So, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, roll call members.
Chair Love,
Yes.
Vice Chair Marino? Yes. Commissioner Maskin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanton?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Dyken?
Yes.
Commissioner Singetti Daniels? Yes. Passed.
Thank you. So next is the approval or disapproval of the site plan and demolition. We could probably just do it as one, right?
Yeah, I mean, in order to approve the site plan, you'd have to approve the removal of the existing.
So why don't we just combine it? Does anybody have any questions about the demo or site plan that's presented? Is there a motion to approve the site plan and demolition of the garage, replacement in kind of the new garage? Motion made by Vice Chair Marino, do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Dygan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, would you please call roll?
Chair Love,
Yes.
Vice Chair Marino? Yes. Commissioner Maskin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanton?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Dyken?
Yes.
Commissioner Singetti Daniels? Yes.
Thank you. All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
All
You see the
set.
building permit, so whenever you're ready, just come.
So what's the next step of the process? I just need to see Sarah and...
Come down to
figure out-
Sarah and just get a building permit for the garage.
Great, can I come tomorrow then?
Okay.
Great. okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night. Night.
So, I kind of, I guess we can discuss during new business, we can do the next applicant. So, I wanted to talk about, kind of the level of review that we want and what could be done and not done by administrative or ministerial review. So we can't make that decision as a planning commission, but we can recommend that to the council.
Let's do this applicant first.
So I was gonna, so we can discuss that during new business. So the next applicant on the agenda is, I'm gonna apologize for butchering your last name. Can you tell us how to pronounce it, please?
So it's for Mr. Sinkowitz, but
Sinkowitz?
yeah, I'm representing him
Okay.
as the survey company.
Excellent, thank you.
And for the record, my name's Eric Ball, if that's.
Very well, thank you. All right, so, we're here to discuss a lot line adjustment. So you wanna give us kind of an overview
Sure. I
of your
have
application?
plenty of maps here, so if you want me to pass them out.
We had him print out a copy of the proposed lot line so you guys can see it. And sometimes these don't pronounce super great on the little guys.
I have the small,
Yeah,
The small one, I can see.
I know when we had that with Vandersons, everyone was kind of like, so we had to bring full-size guys. We directed them to bring full-size ones.
Are those the full-size ones?
They are.
Yeah.
I'll take
We'll
these.
do it.
Yeah, it's bigger.
I'll let you go there, right?
Plenty of them, so. Anyone else?
Just pass it or.
Oh, yeah. This is very
We'll leave that.
What's that? Yeah, so basically what our client hired us to do is to split this existing lot directly in half. It's, the lot is its own, it's not a part of his lot across the street. The gentleman owns a house on one part, you'll see, actually you can't see, but on the northwest, he has a lot and he uses it for parking. And he had a rental house that he sold on the northeastern lot. And that's the whole purpose of him splitting this, is to have lot one be used for parking for the lot that he sold. So that's the general plan there. And, you know, as far as he has stated, it's a lot that can be built on.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's basically a bank.
Yeah.
It's right near like the China Wall, so it's just, it's a bank. I mean, there's no.
It's across where they do that parking.
Yeah, there's just parking there now. I mean, it's literally the depth of a car probably, if not a couple feet in addition, and then it's just a bank.
Okay.
So most of the parcels actually down the bank.
So the existing, you know, that existing parcel is like, you know, used for parking already.
It already is parking as far as.
So it's basically just altering kind of, you know, the orientation, I guess the lot lines and everything, but the existing use would kind of remain.
Well, I think his intention is he sold the house, and he wants one of these parcels to go with it, right?
Right, yeah, lot one, he is basically in contract with the sale.
Right.
And the lot two would be what he would retain to use for parking himself. So that's the general concept there.
Okay. So there it is, so.
House is across the street.
The Hazel, his house.
They actually have a,
Oh, okay, so basically, yeah.
so the houses are all on this side.
So the one he sold is using this for parking.
Oh,
He's
okay.
using this, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So there's the.
And that's the one he.
Oh, I see, so there's the, it says like building there,
Yes.
and then it has a gravel parking, and the other two lot one's basically like a steep slope by itself. And then, you know, both parcels are used for parking for various purposes as it is.
Right.
So really, you know, it's just, there's really no alteration of the existing use. The, you know, the lots are already largely confined by topography as it is.
Yeah, they're not, you're never gonna, I mean, you could maybe put even a tiny house, you'd be walking out into Chestnut Street. and
Yeah,
there's no-
I mean, it just doesn't, you know, or you'd be like, you know, a giant, you know, limestone or whatever hill right behind you, and you couldn't do anything to it anyways, 'cause- okay. Seems pretty straightforward. Again, another item for new business. So yeah, so I guess, you know, kind of similar to what we did before.
So this one, we have kind of a weird, like, our subdivision ordinance in the code is like made for like giant developments. Like it has a whole thing about like, where are you gonna put fire hydrants and where are you gonna put,
Yeah.
so obviously this kind of falls into the like, we don't, like, there's no application for something like this, there's no,
So our code, I mean, our code,
in the past, the planning commission has basically just signed off on these after they review them, so I don't know how you guys wanna.
I thought like the subdivision ordinance contains a provision where the planning commission can say that, you know, that an application meets the spirit, substantially meets the spirit
It
of the
does.
subdivision ordinance.
It does.
We don't have a simple lot split.
We have a definition in the code for that,
Yeah, so.
but there's no process attached.
That's what I was looking up just now, there's no,
Yeah.
so, again, another item for new business we can discuss. But in the case of this application, you know, like, I guess, you know, kind of the core nature of that subdivision ordinance is to, you know, appropriately manage, you know, real estate within the city and make sure that the lots maintain their maximum development potential. And in this case, you know, it meets the purpose of the law, and the remaining provisions governing like orientation of street grids and emergency services apparatus is kind of largely irrelevant because it's a parking lot in a house, you know. So I think that we can probably say that, you know, we found it. I think we would have to, in approving the lot line adjustment, we have to say it meets the spirit and intent of the city subdivision ordinance. You know,
I mean,
largely because, you know, we can say some reasons, but largely because it, you know, is already being used for parking and housing, you know, and it's gonna retain its initial use, and that there's no real, like.
I mean, the lots are conforming
Yeah,
as
the
far
lots
as
are-
like size,
For lots of
frontage.
conforming, so I think as long as we kind of couch that motion effectively, but we should go through seeker first. So this would be, you know,
So we had this down as a sketch plan conference because we didn't have any sort of
okay.
ideas to like what this was gonna look like when we got it. So by the time we got the application, it was basically just sent out as a sketch plan
Okay, so
conference.
it's a sketch plan coverage, okay.
So,
In that case,
I don't know, so there's no secret, we didn't have the secret stuff for it.
okay, so then the appropriate course of action would be to, I mean, I think it's a very straightforward, the sketch plan conference is really intended to ask questions about the application.
Right.
And based on the seekers, the statute, it's very, or the regulations, I should say, based on the regulations, it's very clear what classifications would fall into. So I'm okay. Is everybody okay with moving forward with this application, even though?
Yes.
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 And then DC, like, there's no harm in doing that.
I mean, I don't.
We're not gonna need an EAF, it's gonna be a type 2, so.
Yeah, he doesn't really need to submit anything else, it's
Yeah.
clearly text of action, so.
That's, yeah.
I need that we cover this in type 2 action.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Digan and seconded by Commissioner Maskin to declare this lot line adjustment text of action to seeker. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Rogers?
Yes.
Vice Chair Leo? Yes. Commissioner Maskin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stephens?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Biden?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinzeti?
Yes.
Great, so I suppose we could then, you know, discuss the approval of the lot line adjustment. Is there any questions? People feel like they need any more information, are we good? Okay, I think we're okay. Is there a motion to approve the lot line adjustment as presented?
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Maskin and seconded by Commissioner Thomas. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, could you please call roll?
Chair Leo?
Yes.
Vice Chair Maria? Yes. Commissioner Maskin?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanton?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Digan?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinzeti Daniels?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
You guys almost famous.
Yeah.
So, you'll have to sign the final plat for it goes to the county.
Okay. I'll be.
Oh, it's in state highway, so why is it going to the county?
Well, because he's got to file the new.
Oh, I thought you meant the county planning. I was like,
No.
oh.
County clerk.
No, it's.
I'll be here Monday, you know, back in only on Mondays, I'm just.
Yeah, so these don't have a section, you know, sometimes different planning boards require approved by such and such planning board. Village of Walton, for example, just signs wherever. So these would be considered final, these are stamped and sealed and signed by the licensed surveyor, so I could leave them with you guys
Good.
tonight.
That's good.
All right.
And I'll sign it from there.
We can come, I don't know if the client will from there take it to the county to file, but I can advise them of the decision tonight and tell them to come here to pick them up if that works.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much.
So, alright, so moving on, for new business, thinking about the fraternity and sorority kind of SCP review process or debacle, I'll call it debacle, right? And then like approval of lot line adjustments and garage demos. I feel like those are very straightforward applications. And then that don't require scrutiny from the planning commission, and they require people to come to meetings for what's largely handled administratively already.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
But- So I think that we can't tell the council what to do, make decisions, but we can recommend things under our purview under the charter. We can recommend, various, planning actions to be taken by the city.
Right.
And I think that would be important. Conversely, I think our time would be better spent being involved in discussions around the Market Street redevelopment, other major housing issues in the city or other planning issues within the city. I feel like that more effectively encapsulates our charge under the city charter than approving garage demo while others discuss, major economic development projects in the city, for example. So what do folks think about that?
I tend to agree with you on the latter two, and this type of stuff. I think that with the fraternities, sororities, it's having them here is not such a bad idea because it just sort of forces them to face the public in a way. We represent the public, the city, and it forces them to do that. Otherwise, they really would only be dealing with Stephen's office, and so. It gives them a little more accountability. It gives us a chance to, the public could complain to the city, but it gives us the chance directly to interact with them. And then there's other things that are kind of discretionary. If they have 8 police calls in a 2-year period, it's not going to stop them from getting a special use permit, right? Could it?
So I would wonder if maybe instead of calling these special use permits, we just require as part of their operating permit to do their little presentation for the sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. Have them do their presentation to the planning board or to council as part of an operating permit instead of so the problem that I see with the SUP process, other than just the kind of zoning technicalities of it, we call it a special use permit, but new people can't apply for a special use permit. So if you look at our table, our use tables, fraternities and sororities aren't listed as a permitted use with a special use permit. So if I started a fraternity tomorrow, I couldn't apply for a special use permit. But we have these organizations that in 2000, whenever we started issuing special use permits, 40 years after most of these places had started operating.
What are they listed in MU1? How's that?
So they're in the MU1, we had discussed that in this group, that it's a permitted use in the zone.
Oh, it is.
So then they would be allowed to operate as of right. So, and then other code issues would be handled administratively. by
Right,
city
so
staff.
23 Elm is now in the MU1 zone, so I'm dealing with them entirely, just me and them.
So on top of that, because the city common council didn't put forward an amortization, provision that requires all prior non-conforming uses to come into conformance with the zoning code, they're grandfathered in, so they technically don't have to even,
Yeah, I think there's questions as to whether the SCPs even,
well, they could make an argument that
Because it's not in our code.
they predate it, they
they're grandfathered in, so they're
Grandfathered
existing
in.
non-conforming use. So I think maybe it's not, we say that it maybe doesn't require administrative review, but we think that it should be amended maybe to reflect that they have to do a presentation to the planning commission, and because all of our meetings are in effect public hearings too, that they would be required to have that level of accountability.
In order to do that, you have to make an allowable use in.
well, so they're already pre-existing non-conforming uses. The problem that I see with the SUP is the kids might be fine. 61 Elm Street, the kids don't have any police issues. Everything that they can kind of control is done.
It's the property.
the property. The problem is the person that owns the building is like, I didn't get a sprinkler inspection, I didn't get this, I don't have my electrical inspection up to date. So the reason they don't have a CSC isn't because the kids,
It's because the property
So it's not their
owner.
fault.
it's because the property owner, and there's only so much that the kids are really capable of, you know, like
So
they're
there's
college
like,
kids.
so there's like the logical disconnect in kind of how, you know, the approval process.
Yeah, but if there's a situation where there's a sprinkler system isn't working, I mean, where does it get the health and safety and then have?
Well, so that's what we do. I mean, we handle all that
Right,
stuff.
okay.
Yeah,
So
so
the problem you run into is like, the reason that these guys aren't ready for an SUP is because they haven't turned in their, you know, chapter drinking policy, you know, pledging or whatever. They've turned in all their paperwork. The guy that owns the building hasn't had the sprinkler system.
So I think that, you know, that the way in which, you know, because even in the MU1 zone, they're allowed as of right, so they don't have to do anything.
They still have to get an operating.
They have to get an operating permit, so I guess we make that as part of the requirement that they would do that presentation to us and submit the same paperwork. I think that would achieve the same end, but a lot of like the inspection kind of pieces would also be addressed ministerially, you know, because the planning commission, we don't do like police inspections, we don't do fire inspections, it's outside of our purview, we don't do code compliance, that's what Stephen's there for in his department. So like, I
So
think.
what do we do?
Well, that's the question, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Come
so-
here making a presentation, we say, oh, nice, that sounded good.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, you know, the only, you know, the obvious, you know, kind of the concerns echoed by council kind of relate to ensuring that there's a level of public accountability, that the fraternities are required, you know, are encouraged and or required to interact with the public.
Yeah, the neighbors might want to hear.
Yeah, yeah, so the neighbors want to hear, they want to have a chance to voice their concerns about a particular fraternity or sorority. They will want some accountability, and, you know, and seeing it in an open process kind of increases the level of trust between the public and the city government. So I think there's merit in doing that.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot of the aspects of the review related to fraternities and sororities don't apply to us, but also that there's serious questions about how they're treated under the zoning code that need to be addressed legislatively. You know, which is again, we can't make legislative decisions because we're the planning commission, but the council needs to seriously think about how they're treated under the current code and make the appropriate provisions to ensure that.
Yeah, it certainly seems better to have some sort of operational license or permit than a special use permit.
So that, I mean, considering the fact that that's already the case in MU1, it would make sense that the city pursue a similar legislative action in the other zones.
But it wasn't anything within MU1 that made that was existing prior, the operation permit. Or was it, is it not really?
So what happened was, we had a fraternity that was seeking a use variance in the R2 zone. So the issue came up of, okay, so if we have something that's permitted by right, does it need an SUP? Because if it's a permitted use in the zone, if it gets a zoning variance, do they have to get an SUP? Because now it's permitted use. So, like, knowing that we had some of these questions coming up, knowing that we were changing the downtown zoning that included a sorority house, we said we should put a clause in the code that says these houses require operational permits that meet the same standards as the SUP. So we enacted that ordinance in preparation for some of these houses to become permitted by right.
Is that only in MU1 or is that applies to the whole city?
It applies to the whole city.
So it's already taken care of.
So it's already, okay. So in that case, it's
The clause, like, the catch there is all of the operating permit meets the requirement of the SUP. They're one in this, so like, houses that aren't required to get SUPs get operating permits. It meets the same, it has the same application process, it has the
So it
same.
just, so it would just basically take care of the fact that they're grandfathered in a way.
Mhm.
Okay.
We should probably clarify that within city should probably clarify.
I think the council needs to clarify how they're treated.
Yeah, I think the SUP process was something that was created in reaction to, instead of in.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna make a recommendation to the legislative committee, it would just be to strike the SUP provision, and like as the bulk and use table, just remove fraternities and sororities.
It's not in the bulk use table.
Maybe just remove the SUP requirement from the city code, and then in place of having the operational permits be required, since they're the same criteria.
Right.
Because right now, if I understand it correctly, there's like duplicitous requirements, and that kind of confuses the whole process around.
One group has to come to me, and one group has to come to you,
Yeah. So,
which is where we're at right now. Because the group that gets operating permits, there's no requirement for them to have a public hearing. It's just a,
so one group can just skate by without like the level of public scrutiny that it seems like the city wants, and then the others have to come for this largely performative action. So it creates kind of like an arbitrary.
Sounds to me like there needs to be a local law ordinance that clarifies specifically to fraternity sororities that they need this, just clarify the process, take the word special use permit out of it, right? Is that pretty much just?
Yeah, so just basically amend the sections of the city code that require, fraternities and sororities to obtain special use permits, and standardize it, to be one format, basically.
Right.
Maybe standardize the city code with regard to the treatment of fraternities and sororities. And the specific thing would be to make sure that they all follow the same procedure, getting operational permits. And then the council should also clarify whether or not they want fraternities and sororities to appear in front of the public to discuss their operation or what have you.
yeah, it's kind of been ambiguous because unfortunately, we knew that we were gonna have at least one sorority that was no longer gonna be in. If we allowed fraternities and sororities in the MU1 zone by right, that would create a kind of a weird, they wouldn't need an SUP because they're by right in the MU1 district.
Right.
And the one organization that the zoning board issued a use variance to, obviously, is another special, because now they are.
So there's essentially two fraternities and or sororities that don't necessarily have to comply.
They exist by right.
Yeah, they exist by right, and they don't have to apply for a special use permit, so technically we can't, the commission, like if they get like 100 police calls or something, we can't say, you may no longer operate, we're gonna revoke your special use permit. So it kind of obviates that section of the city code anyway, because you have this distinction where we're applying uneven treatment to the fraternities and sororities in the city. So I think that, so I guess in terms of the new business, I think that we can agree that like lot line lot splits and garage demos kind of.
I would just recommend for the lot split, we add a section on simple lot splits like everyone else has.
Yeah, we had a section in the city code, governing lot splits, and then for garage demos, we feel like that can be handled, by administrative review.
The funny thing about the garage demo thing, that, I'll tell you exactly where that section of code came from. When they bulldozed, there was a large carriage house behind 17 Maple, 16, one of the sorority house.
But why?
The carriage house, right, up here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was up there.
yeah.
But then like that, so if that was like it's a contributing structure, right? So that's like was it a contributing structure? Was it in a historic district at the time?
It is.
It was a historical structure.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was quite in the historical district, wasn't it, just
I
over
think,
the line or
I
something?
think 17 is, it might be.
So if it was like a, contributing structure, then that would trip SHPO review anyway, because they would need to sign off on that.
Well, there was no requirement for it to be reviewed, just a demolition. It didn't have any sort of, at that point, you could just do a demolition.
Interesting. So that's why the ordinance was.
So they created a site plan review requirement for demolitions.
Yeah, I think it's just like,
But then, okay, so
broad.
so I guess the question that I would have is, what's to say that an administrative review wouldn't catch that and we would, we would? Is there any additional layer of scrutiny?
So structures that are on the National Register there's no protection. I mean, if it's not done with government money, if it's not done with, you can pull those whatever you want.
But I guess what I'm getting at is like, if it was like a historic carriage house, and the commission passed that, to you for administrative review, what is the marginal value of having us also review it?
Yeah, I think like, if you really want to protect historic structures, like a CLG, a certified local government, is literally created to do that. So if our ordinance is all about protecting historic structures, instead of reviewing every garage, most of which are not historic, you set up the right structure to protect historic buildings. Which
Yeah,
is
so then
what
in
the
that
process
case,
is for.
it would, the logical connection in that case would be that since the city was recognized by the Preservation League as one of the 7, historic downtowns to save, that the common council legislatively pursues a certified local government status that also involves the creation of a historic or architectural review board or historic preservation commission or whatever.
We had this conversation too.
Yeah, we did.
We've discussed this before.
The political body at the time did not want to further that.
Alan Pope came to us, right? Did the presentation?
Yeah, interestingly, now, the city's very, has reacted favorably to that designation of being recognized by the Preservation League. So maybe,
Yes, so our hope is to move that
but
forward.
I think again, we can make that recommendation. I think that the current format of the law places like an unnecessary, I wouldn't call it a burden, but it just kind of, I guess it would place an unnecessary burden on the public to come to ask for permission from us to demolish a garage and replace it in kind, because people are afraid about historic preservation when there's clearly a more efficient way to deal with that.
In a situation like that, where it's some administrative review that is taken care of, but there's a sense that there's going to be a large public outcry. Maybe there's a certain species of bird or something like that that's on a lot, or, I don't know, but I'm just saying that if there is a lot of blowback about it, then sort of what's the process?
I think in the case that, an administrative, so I guess if there's an administrative review associated with that, you'd have to still do that initial designation under seeker anyway. So in the event that there's an endangered species,
Well, that was a bad example.
yeah, but if there was something that triggered, so a more, a type 1 action under seeker, for example, or even an unlisted action under seeker,
Yeah, which no garages are going to.
they could theoretically, if you required coordinated review and the issuance of a negative declaration or something, or a secret determination of any kind, that would require a public hearing anyway. So then
Yeah,
it would come to us.
Okay.
I think the odds of us triggering a type 1 action on a garage is pretty much never gonna.
But, it could be everyone's favorite garage and they could be really angry about it. But I think
One acre of land.
but I think there's still recourse to do that,
Yeah.
to express concern about it. I think it's just the chances of that happening are so small. And
Well,
then-
it's listed statutorily as a type 2 action.
yeah, so.
Garage is a type 2 action.
Yeah, and those are that's the one size, sure, kind of fits all, and then theoretically municipalities can amend,
Yeah.
establish their own, thresholds for seeker, but that has to be done legislatively again.
Right.
So in the city, they have their own. In Ithaca, they also have their own as well.
Right.
But, the council would need to do that, but I think for example, I would be more interested in discussing major economic development and projects going on in the city, and how that affects us and what we can do, to position the city for success, because that's
What's our next steps?
under our purview. So I guess, Well, in terms of next steps, I feel like we can agree, you know, if we want to agree on some recommendations and make motions to that effect, that we recommend to the council to consider, put it on the legislate, you know. So that way, since Councilman Risberger couldn't attend the meeting, you could refer to the written record, and, you know, bring the, you know, during his committee report, discuss with the council.
I move that we recommend City of Oneonta adopt the zoning, adopt the subdivision code to include a section on simple lot splits.
You know, amend
And then
city zoning code.
city zoning code, include simple lot splits.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Diagan to amend the City of Oneonta zoning code to include sections governing simple lot splits. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Thomas. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, could you please call roll?
Chair Lappin,
Yes.
Vice Chair Marino,
Yes.
Commissioner Maskin,
Yes.
Commissioner Stan,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Diagan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanghetti Daniels.
I'm good at abstaining.
Passes.
Thank you. So how do we feel about garages?
I don't think there's many historical garages left at Oneonta after this last one. I don't think we have to review them. I think it could be done administratively.
So it would, in that case, it would be another amendment to the City of Oneonta.
Well, I first move along with that discussion that we recommend the City of Oneonta revisit the subject of certified local government.
Sure, so we can, so there's a motion on the table from Commissioner Diagan, you know, supporting the City of Oneonta achieving certified local government status with the New York State Office of Historic Preservation. Or it should be
OPRHP.
State.
State
State-
Preservation.
Yeah, Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, or State Historic Preservation Office. Acronyms,
You'll get it.
I'll get it. It'll look right up.
Jerry already had it down, Jerry wrote it.
Just write shit.
Whatever.
That's exactly what I wrote.
Yeah, I love how the minutes can sanitize like bumbling through statements. Anyways, do I have a second?
Let's go to Washington right now.
Sure, I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Maskin. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, would you please call roll?
Chair Lappin,
Yes.
Vice Chair Marino,
Yes.
Commissioner Maskin,
Yes.
Commissioner Stan,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Diagan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanghetti Daniels. Yes.
Passes. Thank you. Okay, so that's garages.
Yeah, my only thing that I guess I would need clarified is if there was like communal outcry or upset, they would have an outlet to express themselves.
So I understand that concept. I don't know if you guys could deny a demolition request because a lot of people are mad. Like, I don't know, like if someone came in here and they were like, I'm here to demolish a garage, I'm looking for site plan review, what would be the?
It'd have to be somehow disastrous for the environment, there's toxic chemicals in there or something.
Yeah.
I think you would have to substantially alter the, like, you know, character, you have to have demonstrated negative effect on like the character of the community. So like the only thing I could think of is if somebody's garage functions as like, maybe like, you know, a restaurant or some sort of home occupation business. But then it would no longer be a garage, it would be a home
Right.
occupation business under the code.
I guess the question is more of building a garage, is more, I can think of more,
Yeah.
more of a chance of denying building a garage, maybe, right? But not
Yeah.
just the
It
demolition.
could be, you know, the, under the traditional, like, Euclidean zoning that we have for majority of the city, as long as it fits the lot characteristics, they, you know, it'd be very hard to prove that it, is it that, you know, a garage of that size, you know, a garage would have like that kind of negative effect on the neighborhood anyway, it'd be really hard. And if we were to, you know, if it were to be denied, there's a chance that the city would be sued, because it'd be very like, it'd be very weird, arbitrary kind of
Is that,
thing.
for the MU1, do people have to come to us for a garage? So is it, should we just,
So the MU1 area is largely a historic district. So most any demolition you do would require site plan review, because in that code, if you're
Yeah.
doing demolition on a contributing building or an accessory building with a contributing building, it requires site plan review. So
Because it's
if-
in the historic village.
Right, but if it was just like I have a shed that I put up in 1996 and I want to tear it down, there's no requirement.
So
I think we should just keep pushing for the city to, I know this takes a massive amount of work, but to change the entire city zoning code to be a form-based code.
yeah, so I can see that.
Because that will just solve a lot of these.
Yeah, so I guess kind of what we're seeing is like growing pains in the city zoning code. You know, there could be,
I think this is a perfect example
so
of
you
any one.
know, there's other, like, there's part of R2, like Walnut Street, is that an R2? So Walnut Street's another historic district, they have garages too.
Right.
But assuming that the city achieves CLG status, they would have another board that would specifically oversee the historic preservation impact. And they likely would have a public hearing about that.
They would have to have.
They'd have to have one. But if, you know, if it's in another place and then, you know, people really like that particular garage, if it has a very nice historic design, like in, I don't know, R3 or, you know, the, you know, College University District, for example, or some, you know, then I could see Commissioner Sandy Daniels, your point. So maybe.
Yeah, more I was thinking like quality of life for the existing surrounding houses. You know, parking garages are pretty
Sure.
big. You
Sure.
could potentially be opening up like a huge
More like,
gaps.
yeah, the impact on, you know,
That's where I would see like where neighbors
On-
might be upset that
yeah,
the
like-
garage is going down.
like on-street parking issues. So, that's a good point.
You said there's money in the CFA to.
Yeah, I mean, there is, so you know, it is, that I do work for the agency, and so I can't vote to
Right.
recommend that the city apply for that grant,
Would
because
you-
of conflict of interest.
Would your office benefit from financial assistance to change the zoning code?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good. I mean, it's not a bad thing to
They'd be
get.
able to get a consultant, you know.
I mean, is that something your office is still interested in doing? Changing the code, is that?
Yeah, I mean, we do it, I'm basically like a one-man show for that.
Right.
So without assistance, it gets done as I have time to do it.
You would, yeah, but under that program, the city would be able to retain consulting services to help you, to basically add another team of planner professionals to help Stephen do it.
I guess what I'm saying is, I was gonna make a motion and recommend the city apply for this, but I just want to make sure it's something who's even interested in taking on.
So if that's the case, you know, I can provide factual information on it. So
Right,
it's
you can.
called the Smart Growth Comprehensive Plan Grant Program. It's provides up to 90% funding for, I think my understanding is it's 90% funding
For comprehensive plan or zoning?
for both.
One of our
Just-
consultants already brought it to our attention.
Well, while he's looking that up, I'll make a motion that we encourage the city to apply for this New York State Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning, we can change that name when he gets it, program,
Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning Grant Program.
this plan grant program, to aid in creating a form-based code for the entire city, not just the downtown district. With, and then we can sort of say informally, that could be the motion, but, you know, we have a case study here in the shed, where we see that in MU1, it's not a problem, and then outside of that, it's a hurdle, it's a hassle for the public. That we don't, I mean, this is just one example, right? So,
What if we call it the Red 3 Express?
So it says that state assistance awarded to a paid grant recipient shall not exceed 90% of total eligible costs.
we don't have to put that in there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so motion made by Commissioner Dagan to support an application made to the New York State Department of State for the Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning Grant for the fiscal year 2022-2023.
Has the deadline, it's not
No.
passed, right?
It hasn't. Is there
I'll second.
seconded by Vice Chair Marino? So discussion, I have to abstain, I have a conflict of interest, I'm an employee of the Department of State. So I must.
He's in favor.
Must recuse myself from this discussion. Okay, so hearing no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Malcolm?
Abstain.
Vice Chair Marina?
Yes.
Commissioner Massey?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanton?
Yes,
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Dugan?
Yes.
Commissioner Daniels?
Yes.
see, it passed even though you abstained.
Yes, there you go.
But just have to be
You
careful.
can do whatever you want with that. You can vote them out, right?
Yeah, you could. I think my wife will like you after that. So, so it looks like for the zoning, the max award is 100,000, but if you did like a specific area plan or rezone a particular area of town, like, ME1, for example, you could get up to $200,000 according to the hour. But I think for zoning, it's 100 grand. Okay, so is there any other new business? Okay, hearing none.
Do we make a motion for fraternities for?
I don't think
say
we,
anything about that, did we?
oh, and we haven't, okay, that's right. So I guess the last piece of new business is to, I guess if I understand the discussion that we had correctly, it would be to, standardize how fraternities and sororities are treated under the zoning code. Is that correct?
Standardized in the sense that they would all come through here or no?
They would all.
They would all do the same thing.
They would all be, I think we would recommend, the council would have discretion about how they would be treated, but we would ask that they have they apply the standard treatment consistently. I think because right now, it's not the case. There's like two that can just exist as of right, and the rest have to get SUP.
And we should clarify in that, standardize the process by removing the special use permit requirement for them and instituting an alternate.
Operating permit requirement, as shown in the ME1 zoning code, adopted ME1 zoning code changes.
Let's,
Separate from that.
so there's an entire chapter of our code on fraternities and sororities that exists outside of like the ME1 code. It covers all fraternities and sororities in the city. The problem is that some of them now exist by right and some of them exist on these special use permits. So just like we wouldn't require Dunkin' Donuts to get a special use permit because it's permitted by right, we can't, you can't say that 23 Elm Street, which is also a permitted use by right, has to get a special use permit.
So it would basically, we would be asking, the council to standardize how fraternities and sororities are treated by no longer requiring fraternities and sororities to obtain special use permits. The rationale being that they already are required to obtain operating permits that have the same standards.
Couldn't we just have an application for places to become included in that section?
Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. There's a variance process and one of the fraternities was given a variance.
So the problem with
So-
getting a use variance is that it runs with the land. So no matter what they do, they can always operate as a fraternity or a sorority. It's allowed. Basically, the zoning code, they get relief from the zoning code. So whatever enforcement mechanisms we have in the code, because they obtain that use variance and that allows them to operate, it does so in perpetuity so long as, the land, the properties continue to be used as a fraternity, just runs with the land basically. So a new fraternity, if that fraternity goes away and a new one comes in, they have that same relief from the zoning code. So that's the problem with the variance. So we want to make it so that they have to comply with the zoning code, but they're given the same standard of review. Whereas, and because we have the operating permit and the special use permit have the same requirements, it doesn't make sense to have them both because there's no added value aside from that. But then we'd have to have that secondary recommendation, that's what we want, to have like the fraternities and sororities also come and present to us as part of the operating permit.
Or the council.
Or the council, I mean, maybe it's the council's perspective too, because I don't know if I think it's largely their concern, like they seem to really want that, and it seems to be a city priority. Because if, in fact, the permit requirements are already being met, there's really no need for us to look at it. Whereas the council can if they want to. Because then at that point, it'd be largely a community relations issue, and then that would be under the purview of council.
It's up to you guys.
It's up to us.
I'm cool with
So what do we
whatever you
think?
That sounds good. What you just said. I couldn't repeat it, but.
Okay, so I would say, so I guess, I would open the floor for discussion of a motion to eliminate the special use permit requirements for fraternities and sororities because they're duplicitous with the operating permit requirements that also apply to fraternities and sororities. And make that recommendation to council.
I'll second that.
I guess if I
Well articulated motion.
Okay, so motion made by Chair Lappin and seconded by Commissioner Maskин. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, could you please call roll?
Chair Lappin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Marino.
Yes.
Commissioner Maskin.
Yes.
Commissioner Stanton.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Dyken.
Yes.
Commissioner Singleton Davis.
Yes.
Passes.
Thank you. So is there any other new business? Okay. Hearing none, motion to adjourn.
So.
Motion made by Commissioner Maskin, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Thomas. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're done.